Hello everyone and welcome once again to How to Pakistan. I've got Mosharraf with me and I'm very excited today. I'll let Mosharraf open and explain who our guest is.
Well, that is very, very kind of you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. And thanks for making us sort of have the discipline to keep doing this, because the reaction and the response from friends, from people we don't know, it's just been phenomenal. I will remind listeners, a little bit of effort, especially in iTunes, if you can put in a nice review, or even a not so nice, just don't put in a really crappy one. That would be terrible.
Abhi to mufte ka scene chal raha hai na, listening to it and getting koi star bhi nahi de raha.
Please put us a star. We'd like a few stars if you don't mind. But just again to thank the listeners, alhamdulillah, the feedback's been phenomenal. The reason Fasi's excited, and I know he's excited because when I texted him with the kind of idea, usually with Fasi, you have to wait. Friends of Fasi's will know. You have to wait a while for a response. So I sent Fasi a text. I said, Fasi, the great Pratap Bhanu Mehta is in town and we should totally do a podcast with him. And I didn't really know, because I'm a bit of a nerd on this stuff, and so I know PBM, and I didn't know if Fasi knew. And
you thought I knew PBJ.
So anyway, that's the long way of setting up the fact that we are so honored and so excited to have one of the great global public intellectuals, and certainly sort of somebody who's probably peerless in South Asia, certainly in India. We have a few smart people here in Pakistan, but certainly, there's few people that measure up. Pratap Bhanu Mehta is in Islamabad. We were doing something yesterday and today with a larger group that was focused on South Asia and the region. And I asked Pratap if he'd be willing to do the podcast, and he didn't even hesitate. And so delighted to have you with us, Pratap. Thank you so much for doing this. And you should know that you are the first studio guest. We had another guest, but that was in a different venue. You're also the first non-Pakistan. Well, Opi was also technically
non-Pakistani.
Well, he was Pakistani Australian.
Yes.
But Pratap is Indian all the way.
Yes.
And so our first sort of foreign guest is, I think, quite poignantly and quite correctly from the Republic
a very high
of
bar.
India. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So welcome to the show, Pratap.
It's a real privilege to be here, and frankly quite intimidating with the talent just sitting in this room. I mean, there's already so much energy, I know this is going to be quite overwhelming.
So what we don't want is people to be thinking hashtag Aman Ki Asha or anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was very nice, but let's mix it up a little bit and not be so nice to each other for the rest of the show.
Yeah. I agree. I'm all for it.
Although our friend Umar Varaj says that you're the nice, kind, gentle sort of host. And
it's amazing. I'll just accept it. Yes, go ahead.
Well, just to introduce Pratap, for those listeners that don't know who he is, Pratap is a scholar, an academic, a public intellectual. He is based in New Delhi. He's got his own think tank, which is called the Center for Policy Research. He is, much like Fasi Zaka, he is a product of the great Oxford University. He did postgraduate work at Princeton. I didn't know any of this, because what I knew about Pratap when we met yesterday for the first time, we've known each other sort of from a distance and we've exchanged messages and emails, but what I assumed that Pratap, because of the way he writes, he has a column in the Indian Express, and if you've never read it, then that's something you should RSS into your sort of feed.
Maybe not RSS.
Meaning, I was going to say, don't ever associate me.
So that's the end of our security clearance. No. What I meant was your something syndicated something, right?
Yes.
The internet.
Really
thing.
simple syndication.
And to the listeners, I just noticed the color of this office is saffron.
Yes.
There's a lot of subliminal messaging going on. No, so Pratap, when you read Pratap's pieces, you clearly get somebody who's incredibly sort of observant and sensitive to what's happening globally as well, but especially within India. But the other thing that you get is somebody who's aware that just having a PhD and reading a lot of books and throwing out a lot of big words is probably not a great way of engaging with the public discourse. And so I had assumed that Pratap, really smart, probably ex-civil servant, probably probably worked in government a little bit. No, but he's an academic through and through. So that's my setup for this, is that, I'm always blown away by people who can combine high levels of intelligence with an understanding and a sensitivity for how things work, and then being able to communicate those things in a way that's effective.
I'll just add two things, and I realize that we're speaking on your behalf.
I don't know myself, so please be my guest.
So it's putting India in its place. Pakistan speaks for India today. Yeah.
Two Pakistanis, we're going to speak for India.
Yeah. No, but I just want to add, I agree with that. But if listeners want to read, there's a number of great pieces that Pratap has done, but two stood out in my mind. One was I'm Sanskrit. You are a deep thinker, but the poetic level of which it was less a column, more verse to me, and very deep ideas. I think somebody should actually, if you want to get an introduction to Pratap, one is read that. The other is the piece you wrote on Amir Khan during the height of the controversy. And in it, there's one thing, I think a lot of people carried that also, but it says true patriotism is being okay with sometimes being ashamed of some parts of your country. And I think that sort of confidence building, it just really got to the center of what was being debated. The idea of who you are as a patriot. Does it mean blind cheerleading? Does it mean, putting things under the carpet? And I think that piece, again, I think it applies equally well to Pakistan and a number of other countries which are going through ideas of who they really are and, how they need to mitigate those ideas in terms of support for what is fragile countries, maybe less so India, but increasingly problematic there too. So anyhow, Pratap, rather than us defining who you are...
Yeah, because I haven't told you my favorite pieces.
Oh, please.
Yes. No. I'll throw that in there. But yeah. Pratap, why don't you set us, for listeners that don't know who you are, talk to us. Who is Pratap Bhanu Mehta?
Well, I always remember Bulle Shah's opening like that, Bulla ki jana mein kaun. That's got to be the starting point. And self-presentations and autobiographies, there's always something sort of awkward and shameless about them. So I'm not sure I'll kind of represent myself. I'll just say a sort of couple of things about what I do and you can make of it. I think I want to begin with the point Fasi raised, which is about academics, the relationship between academics and the public sphere. I was an academic. I did a PhD. I taught political theory at Harvard for 10 years. And I must confess that I actually have not just enormous respect, but I think the highest ideal is actually the contemplative life. There are too many people trying to change the world, too few trying to understand it. And a scholar who says, I'm writing a book that only 2 people in the world will read, that non-instrumental attitude is something I absolutely adore. I think that's the starting point of true inquiry. I think the public engagement part of it is when we moved back to India from the United States after having lived in the US for 14 years and before that 3 years in England, 2 things became very clear to me. One was that our India, and I think this is true of this region as a whole, was undergoing this massive transformation. We had no idea where all the chips were going to fall. And when you're thinking
What year was this?
This was 2001.
Okay. Oh, wow. I moved to Pakistan the same year.
Right. So there you go, there's destiny.
Peas in a pod, man.
Right? Peas in a pod, right?
Yeah.
So when you're engaging with a fast-moving target, a lot of your thinking is actually very tentative and exploratory. We have no idea what this region will look like 15 years from now, honestly, right? And so it required a medium that you could actually keep up with, in a sense, the pace of that. But the second thing I realized that in a democracy in particular, and I don't mean democracy just in a formal sense, but just in the sense that in a South Asian context where there's so much energy bubbling up from the bottom, anybody who has the illusion that they can claim power over this society is going to come to grief pretty quickly.
Oh, boom.
So the question is, who governs India? Well, it's not actually entirely clear. And so the point about the public sphere is the advantage is you don't know who will take up your ideas where and in what form. Right. And secondly, it was an avenue of opening up a different kind of conversation, right? Where I think Emerson once said that what one soul can receive from another is not instruction, only provocation. And hopefully it's a provocation to think, where you basically say, look, before we come to our conclusions, before we settle down in our prejudices and our values, have you thought of this, and that, right? And I think that function of writing has been incredibly enjoyable, and certainly one of the most exciting learning journeys that I've experienced.
When did the policy think tank sort of come about? Was that a lead on from the writing, or was it the other way around, or were they sort of simultaneous?
Actually, like most good things in life, it was a complete accident. I had started public writing. When I moved back to India, I'd moved to a university thinking I'd have a university career.
JNU? So that's
which was-
Jawaharlal Nehru University
which is
in
India's leading sort of university. And for various reasons, JNU didn't quite work out as it hoped. I mean, the students were absolutely fabulous. I mean, I completely believe this, which is if you take the students seriously, they will rise to the occasion, no matter how ill-prepared they are. But for various institutional and administrative reasons, JNU did not turn out to be as propitious as I had hoped. And then we were faced with a dilemma, which is go back to the United States. I still sort of had that option. Or move to something else, because unfortunately one of the big tragedies of South Asia, I think generally India, I can say with more confidence, is that it became clear that our public higher education system was sort of crumbling, and it was going to be very hard to do with integrity the kinds of things you wanted to do living in that system. Now, this is a broader complaint. I mean, Nietzsche said in the 19th century that living in a university is always living a life of a lie, as it were. So there is a kind of existential connotation to it. And I was deeply torn because I love teaching. But it became clear to me that public universities were going to take out more from you than you could actually contribute. For instance, one very small thing, which is the reason I had chosen JNU was it was one of the few universities in India where you could make up your own courses. You didn't have to teach syllabi drawn up by some anonymous committee, which was a politically horse-traded syllabi.
Back in 1951.
Right back in 1951, that was a great advantage JNU had. I mean, that's one of the things that keeps kind of JNU going. So, but there weren't too many other universities like that. And so we actually did go back to the US in 2004. My position at Harvard sort of allowed me to come back. And then the Center for Policy Research came out of the blue. It's actually an old think tank. It was established in the 70s. Okay. But by the late 1990s, mid-2000s, because of larger changes happening in the world, the institution had sort of hollowed out a little bit. It still had some great people, but its average age was sort of 70 plus. And I think the people on the board, Center for Policy Research, who came, I think they were drawn by the public writing. I mean, that's how they kind of knew me. I mean, I said, look, you've got the wrong person. I'm a political theorist. I know nothing about policy, know even less about the state. But I think it's to their credit that they said, look, here's a chance to rebuild a kind of new institution. I was also attracted by the fact that being in India had convinced me that what we needed to create were spaces which supported people at doing what they do best. Let them loose on the world. Protect their academic freedom, with every last fiber of your being. And if somebody asks us, what's the exciting thing about CPR? Why do I have fun colleagues? And I do have incredibly fun colleagues. I mean, it's really, I think all of them would say this, which is it's a place that supports you in doing what you want to do and doing it best.
Yeah.
So I just want to add a quick question here, actually. And this is in relation to some of the things that India is going through these days and also in terms of your writing. But it's a very narrow question. So, there's certain words we come up with. I think it's fascinating what India-Pakistan comes up with sometimes. So if you say, you're Vela, and then you say, okay, what are you doing? Veleration, right? and it's this word these days that I see you use, actually, toleration.
Right.
And I'm wondering, why do you use that instead of tolerance?
That's a very good question. In fact, my next book is actually just on that.
Okay.
It's going to come out in 2 months. It's a short book, fortunately. Long books are beyond one these days. There is the standard critique of the idea of toleration, which is toleration presumes the power to, as it were, withhold assent or crack down. And some would argue that toleration is actually antithetical to the conception of rights, right? But I think toleration has, in the kind of common parlance, in the loose English usage that we use in South Asia, actually come to stand in for those values that we associate with tolerance and rights. So often people, what they mean when they say is you're being intolerant is you're violating my rights, right? So I think it's a word that has become rescued from, as it were, the theoretical baggage, which you very rightly point out it has, because even toleration was an exercise of power, where somebody in power says, look, I have the power to crush you. I'm choosing not to. Right. In that sense, toleration always signifies the kind of the hierarchy of power. But I think the core issue that I think we are grappling with in toleration debate, and I suspect this again applies across South Asia, right, is there are two big debates that run through all our countries. And I think it runs through, in a sense, the individual psyche of each one of us. I think we are sort of schizophrenic around this, as it were. And the two debates are the following. One is the debate between forces of social orthodoxy and the forces of social liberation, which is people in our society saying that there are certain traditional norms, often invented traditional norms, that individual behavior has to conform to, whether it's in terms of what people wear, how people dress, and particularly the particular axis of that conflict always happens to be gender in one way or the other, right? Who you can marry and so forth. So, and this is a process all societies go through, right? The second process, which has kind of been overlaid on this, is what you might call the process of identity formation, right? And I don't want to go into debate over partition and sort of so forth. Like that's all in the past. But one of the things that's unleashed is that for the last 70 years, right, all of our countries have tried to create a narrative for themselves. Some kind of identity, some kind of protective security blanket, right, that allowed us to answer who we are, right? We are Pakistani, we are Indian, what does that sort of mean, right? But that very process, the form it has taken, has also trapped us into what I call an identity trap. Because the minute you ask the question of somebody, what is your identity? You are benchmarking it into something that you think is normal or acceptable. And that benchmarking is always going to be incompatible with some conception of freedom. Right. So if you say, who is an Indian? To me, the issue is not, whether there are two conceptions of India. People say there's a liberal one, there's a more reactionary one. But we also have to recognize that the very question itself, who is an Indian, already puts you in a trap. Right? Because it already says there's a benchmark. It already says there is a defined way of doing it. We can't be different from what we are. We can't be more than what we are. Right? And I think that identity trap is something we have sort of consciously or unconsciously, in a sense, drifted sort of into, right? And I think what we are looking for is a new language to sort of break out of that trap. And the language that I think connects both of these debates, orthodoxy and conservatism and identity sort of, versus freedom, is actually a language of freedom. That we need to envision South Asia, India, not as a kind of federation of communities, where the goal is how do you actually manage the peace between communities that have distinct identities, right? It is how do you actually liberate individuals within all of these communities to actually create and experiment with their own identities. And many of the traditional things will remain preserved. I mean, I'm not saying identity should not matter to people.
But so here's my problem with really smart people. So we're on different sides. Like you said, writing a book for just two people. I have this, I'd like to think, reasonably healthy contempt for academia, because I think that there's a lot of, in fact, one of my great gripes in life is that some of the most incredibly and intensely intelligent people choose to sit inside a university and really rob larger society of the impact that they could have if they could develop the nuances and the skills to engage in the public discourse. Because they're so much smarter than everyone else, they would be much better at it than sort of some of the people that are currently sort of engaged, right?
Go ahead.
So, but the problem with these as a theoretical construct, everything you've said makes great sense. But kind of the cynical side of me thinks, well, two things are happening at the same time. There are these constraints where people are boxed into their straitjackets of identity and social orthodoxies and what have you. But there's also a lot of experimentation. I mean, multiple identity and the degree of comfort that some of the millennials that I see across the region and globally have today. Even I really pride myself on being very, very comfortable with sort of multiple. Like somebody says, "What are you?" So I say, "I'm I'm Pakistani." I say, "What are you?" Well, I'm sort of. I mean, one answer is I'm Canadian. Say, what percentages? I say 100% Pakistani. Say, what about religion? I said 100% Muslim. So what sect? I say, well, I don't like the whole sect thing, but if I have to be, I'm from multiple sects because they make. I mean, Shias make a lot of sense to me, but Alvis make a lot of sense to me, and there's a lot of Salafism that makes a lot of sense to me. And why can't I just So that thing about sort of experimental, sort of picking and choosing and cherry picking, really, identity cherry picking. Right. Isn't that something we're already doing? It's not like I don't think the BJP or the Jamaat-e-Islami are preventing us from going out and picking whatever we want.
Absolutely right, and in fact, you could argue that actually that has a much older history. I mean, I don't, we don't want to kind of fall into the trap of thinking that.
But we're already falling into it.
This process is a kind of millennial construction. In fact, insofar as peoples of South Asia have kind of lived, right, they've always, in a sense, the vernacular language of negotiating identity is actually far richer and far more complex, right, than our abstract ideological conceptions. You can see it in music. You don't ask these questions about origin as insistently, right? But having said that, I think it is important to ask this question: why doesn't all that energy, experimentation, that natural liberality that is down there, why isn't that being channelized into, in a sense, stable institutional structures, right?
गर्मी बहुत है.
हाँ?
It's really hot.
नहीं, गर्मी बहुत है, तो इसीलिए तो किसी को फ्रिज लाना पड़ेगा, थोड़ा बर्फ निकालना पड़ेगा, थोड़ा वो हम लोगों का दिल इतना क्यों भरा है? दिमाग तो बहुत तेज है, लेकिन दिल इतना क्यों भरा है?
बोलो फसी.
I have no answer to that, actually. But I was just thinking about another thing I wanted to add is, like, basically, this is sort of side, but I've also got a question for you, which is, we also have this complaint, like, we find all these great academics in Pakistan, why aren't you engaging more? And one of the problems is, and I'd be interested in what you say, is that it's actually their academic training that's the problem. Over time, when you do a PhD, subsequently when you're writing for these publications, there's a certain reward. They're gatekeepers for these publications. They reward a very dense style, and over time, people forget not everyone knows as much as you when you're talking to other experts, especially in furthering your field.
Yeah.
It takes some training to get back if you want to reach out to the general public in ways that your material becomes much more accessible. It becomes something that people can at least drive. But a question I have for you, which I noticed this in one of your pieces recently, like, you were speaking about Congress and how Congress is no longer as strong, but one of the things that you brought out was corruption. And now, one of the things what I was excited about talking to you was, how can I understand Pakistan by looking at India as well? Like, where are our divergences? So, some of the people I know or the writers I've read, everyone has this hope for Congress, that this is such a diverse country that somebody who's really embedded in secularism and non-communalism can eventually keep it together. But their non-delivery, their corruption is an issue. Here in Pakistan, I have the same thing. Like, I have huge amounts of sympathy for the PPP, ANP, and I'm deeply disappointed in their delivery. And I find that I make, so what is the future of parties like this where, you've just had somebody elected who's gotten rock star status abroad, surprisingly, from a lot of quarters, partly because it's a delivery question. So I'm just curious about that.
I think there are two things, right? So one, I think the big lesson, which I think applies to the Congress and to the PPP, it actually applies to even other older parties in South Asia. I think of the Nepali Congress, for example, as another, in a sense, parallel, right? Which is, I think the big tragedy of South Asia is, there's a political scientist who once said something very profound, which is that, look, societies don't destroy their institutions, elites do, right? And I think the credibility of those elites, right, of these political parties, for very legitimate reasons, diminished considerably because of these corruption scandals, because of their in a sense, inability to deliver. But I think the inability to deliver centers on one very crucial institutional question, which is, these movements gain legitimacy in a certain historical context, Congress in the aftermath of nationalism and nation building. But you cannot sustain governance in the modern world unless you create inclusive and participatory structures of government. You can't have inclusive growth without inclusive governments. People are not going to be governed in the same old way. And one of the challenges both our states are facing, right, is our states are designed for vertical accountability, which is, if you can please your boss, that's what accountability means. What are people demanding? Horizontal accountability. Our states are excessively secretive in the way they work. What are people demanding?
Show me, tell me.
Not just show me, tell me, but the knowledge that we can generate now outside the state can shame the state more, right? 20 years ago, if your air was poisoned and the state didn't tell you, you won't know. Now there's an NGO with a monitor running around measuring your air, right? So the asymmetry of knowledge between state and society has changed, right? Centralization, decentralization. I know in Pakistan there's a debate. At what level of governance should what function be carried out? The whole negotiation between public and private, right? You have the PIA strike here. But one of the big challenges in South Asia is our state still hasn't got clear on first principles. What should the state be doing and what should the private sector be doing, right? Now, these were debates and these were processes and structures that these parties, in a sense, refused to, as it were, engage with, right? None of these parties had real intra-party democracy. right? I mean, you know a party is going to decline
Yes.
at some point and become more centralized and more corrupt if it doesn't have an internal institutional mechanism for renewal, right? So in the Congress party's case, it was obvious, right? Which is there were newly emerging social groups. Congress could have easily incorporated them, right? The Dalit movement, the OBC movement. There were no ideological differences.
Well, can I just challenge
Yeah.
this idea of not having these internal mechanisms of renewal? I think one of the interesting things about both Congress and the PPP is that these instruments of renewal were enforced and shoved down their throats. The renewal was the assassination of the party leaderships. And I think the sustenance of their relevance as political parties owes at least part of its being to the fact that the renewal happens the moment something is taken away, and that sense of sort of not bereavement, but kind of a lot of people, I think, feel robbed when that happens. I don't know India, I would ask you, but I certainly know that, I mean, I was just hearing someone today explain how they reacted to the news about Benazir's assassination back in 2007. People who had nothing to do with the PPP, who'd never voted PPP, just felt like just gutted, like internally gutted, that like, how did this happen? Why did this happen?
It was traumatic.
It was a trauma, right? If you had voted for 2 generations for the PPP, like across like 25 years, imagine that person's state on that day, and imagine the reaction in terms of, fine, they'll flirt with the PTI when they're really angry with, Zardari or whatever. Those people are going to vote for the PPP again, and it won't be for any reason other than that sense of, somebody tried to take this away from me, and I'm going to go and give it back to them. I know, I don't know, but I sense that particularly with Rajiv, that there was this kind of midstream robbery, like this highway robbery that took place, and a lot of those people voted not necessarily for functional reasons, but for emotional reasons.
No, look, I think that's absolutely right, particularly about Rajiv Gandhi's election and the absolutely unprecedented majority he got, because in a sense it was the electorate making a statement, which is, one way of thinking about it is, look, you can't take away our leaders from us. We can boot them out.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
it's actually something more elemental, because those attacks and those assassinations became a symbol of a kind of, well, 2 things. One, a kind of attack on the nation itself, right? And secondly, I think the sense that, if even these people aren't safe, right, what future do you think the country has, right? So that moment of anxiety. Having said that, at least in the Indian context, right, particularly post 1977, it's actually very hard to argue that the family charisma alone made a difference, right? Indira Gandhi was booted out. Now the opposition made a hash of it, and in a sense she came back to power. Rajiv Gandhi managed to fritter away a 400-seat majority, right, within the space of 5 years. If you take North India, right, which is really Congress's Achilles heel. I mean, one of the reasons Congress is not reviving is it doesn't have a major strategy for UP, doesn't have a strategy for Bihar, the Hindi heartland.
अरे यूपी के लिए तो भगवान के पास भी शायद strategy now.
नहीं,
मतलब, I'm sort of coming from there, sort of my parents were born there. It's does anyone have a strategy other than Amit Shah ji? Does anyone have a strategy for UP?
Mayawati won the state. Mulayam Singh won the state. They're not able to capitalize on that. But they did have an electoral strategy.
But does India? I mean, this is I'm sorry, sort of. I'm disrupting your
sure.
train of thought. But Bihar and UP both are bigger countries than Pakistan.
Right.
Just as states in terms of how big they are. And we often have this conversation about, Punjab is too big, and certainly proportionality wise, absolutely. But really, you have these states of 200 million people with issues that are so complex that I don't even pretend to want to look at them to try and understand them. Like, there's PhDs waiting to happen, like in every village in UP and Bihar, right? What, even if India's, I mean, it looks to me like, if we were to fast forward this discussion, because we got stuck in this typical Pakistani sort of like, PPP Congress discussion, right? Like,
I apologize.
I mean, the joke used to be, right, whichever party rules India will have to end up looking like the Congress party. So,
yeah. No, but I mean, if you fast forward, it looks like, certainly partly because the private sector is driving this, and partly because the Indian diaspora is so humongous and so influential that the shape of the Indian city and the Indian sort of sub-cities, like it's not just Delhi, it's Gurgaon and Noida, right? That those will become they'll become the places that Indians use to continue to fool themselves that India's like this, sorry to say, right? Like this kind of modern global superpower, because it looks like Dubai, except that, that's maybe less than a third of India. And outside those places, it seems to me that's UP and Bihar. Nobody has a strategy. Nobody has a... Am I wrong? Am I totally wrong?
No, I think you're perfectly right about the issue, right?
Okay.
And the issue being in a sense that development is very uneven, and it's really not, anywhere remotely in the kind of the range of momentum that you say India has finally arrived. I think there's a huge exaggeration about India's footprint in the world, right? I think that part is right. I think where I would disagree with you slightly is, in a sense, the geographical portrayal of it, right?
Okay.
So, and geographical portrayal in the sense that despite everything, right, you cannot escape the fact that Gurgaon is in India. You just have to, sort of drive for 2 minutes and you will encounter poverty and destitution.
Okay.
You will encounter the same sort of, ill-formed roads. I mean, we don't even have roads where you can actually sort of, have a decent kind of traffic intersection, right? The same dysfunctionality of the state, right? The same nexus between contractors and the state that has kind of disfigured the city, right? So I don't want to leave the impression that sort of, there's a Gurgaon paradise and then there's a kind of the badlands of UP. On the other hand, the interesting thing is, because places like Delhi and Gurgaon are actually sort of, hugely expensive, a lot of the real dynamic industrial activity is actually beginning to happen in the middle of places like UP. In fact, UP's growth rates are not bad. I mean, just in pure economic terms, UP is actually not done badly the last, 7 to 10 years.
We're going to have to write a memo to all the Mahajers in Karachi, right? All
Right.
all the MQM guys, UP's figuring it out.
Absolutely. So in that sense, that the geography of development is actually quite sort of complicated, and one interesting way, I'm sure it's the same in Pakistan as well, but you just drive along UP, right? The one thing that the last few years of growth has done is completely transform the demand of education. So the state has a very dysfunctional education system, but the poorest of the poor are spending whatever they have, starving themselves to send their kids to private school, right? Now, at one level, that's the kind of underlying sort of change which you can see even in the middle of UP.
No, that's fascinating because Fasi, this, and I gave this presentation once. Right after sort of the Swat operation, because there was this whole conversation about, the Taliban are like 60 kilometers from Islamabad. And sort of to explain to people that if you drive from Islamabad towards Swat and you just take a picture of every billboard, every second billboard was advertising private education. So yes, this country has a lot of problems, but this latent, like white hot, incandescent sort of, demand for education is something that people don't quite sort of take into account in terms of analyzing this. And we worked on this together. We worked on the March for Education campaign. Fasi and I worked on this campaign, which was kind of a precursor to what I'm doing now, this Alif Elan thing. And we kind of, one of the reasons I think we had some success with March for Education was that we took cognizance of the fact that this is not a demand side issue anymore in this country, at least, and that's what I hear from Pratham and from everybody in India that works on this.
Yeah, I mean, I actually just want to shift back to another question, which one of the things that I find interesting about India, and I'm not somebody who follows India very deeply, so Mosharraf will be able to ask you.
But
really
I'm sure you see more clearly.
But one of the things that I find interesting about India, especially over the past 4 or 5 years, I find as a nation, both from its government-sponsored things, is that it's able to project an image to the world. Whether that's overestimating what it is or not is another question, but I'm wondering within India, also within the discourse, so you've got issues like education underdevelopment and really severe problems actually, and issues that have also suddenly emerged, like, with the Delhi gang rape, things that you're acknowledging now. But I'm wondering is the national discourse very tilted towards urban metros and their potential, how they're contributing compared to the rest of the country? Because it's sort of the case in some ways here, because like if you look at Balochistan, it doesn't make the mention as often as or treated as equally in terms of like even just news parity.
So there's one sense in which that's absolutely true, which is the structure of the Indian media has made the rural invisible, right? In ways that are absolutely unprecedented. I mean, you just have to watch the evening news, right? What are they picking on? There is right now, for example, a major drought going on parts of India, Vidarbha, Bundelkhand. If you watch television news, you would not know that that was actually happening.
So just switch Tharparkar with...
Right,
Exactly.
right. And that you can actually analyze. I mean, there's a structure of the media market, the way it's kind of taken on itself, the idea of sort of representing India in some ways.
And
right?
Pratap, just go into that structure a little bit more. So that's all because it's Delhi and Mumbai. Or Kolkata? Like what is the structure? Is it over representation of the urban middle class, or is it something else?
So it's two things, right? One, obviously, the structures of advertising, right? What kinds of products will look for advertising and where.
Yeah.
But the second thing, and I'd recommend a book if you haven't actually seen it. No relation of mine, somebody called Nalin Mehta has just written a book on the Indian media, particularly television media.
Okay.
And one of the very startling points he makes there, right? So India has all these news channels, right? Literally hundreds of them if you add up the regional channels, right? No sane market should be able to sustain them. Except one or two, not a single channel has made money in 15 years.
A lot of them are vanity projects, right?
So they're vanity projects, they're projects for buying influence, they're projects for sort of, laundering money perhaps, right? I mean, sort of media has become...
I mean, I wouldn't know anything about that in Pakistan. We don't have anything like that.
So it's very hard to argue that this media is in a sense either driven by some not just conception of public purpose, forget that for a minute, right? But even any pretense to actually representing India or telling the whole story. It's driven by a very complicated set of economic imperatives that most of us outside do not even begin to understand, right? So in that sense, the media has actually made the rural India visible.
Invisible.
Invisible, sorry.
Yeah.
Has made it invisible. But I think there's a flip side to it, which is, I think the way we now think of rural-urban connections, given the developments that have happened, connectivity, roads, education.
It's a very dated... Yeah.
Is also actually very different, right? Yeah. So think of a sort of typical rural family, right? Where one brother has kind of become a migrant in the city, right? The circular migration, comes home for the harvest, goes back, right? The way they begin to define themselves, right? In terms of their own identity, right? Is also becoming much more complicated, right? I mean, 20 years ago, Indian politicians were pretty confident they knew what rural India wanted, right? Now, rural India itself as a category, in fact, one of the striking figures is 50% of the income generated in rural India has nothing to do with agriculture, right? It's actually small industries, all those kinds of things.
Is that really?
Yeah,
50%.
Yeah, so
50%.
That's a lot.
That is huge.
It's kind of non-farm, sort of income, right? So, in a sense, what we think of as the rural, right, has also undergone a massive transformation. The second way in which rural has gone a massive transformation, and that's where actually the media influence is interesting. I think there's new data going to be coming out soon, the National Family Health Survey, that the fertility rate in India has been dropping. In fact, if you look at, I think some data is suggesting in almost 20 states, it's actually now close to just replacement level, right? Now, we know two factors drive this. Traditionally, women's education drives fertility rates, right? And South Asia as a region had kind of lagged behind this. But there's actually some evidence suggesting that the fact that this kind of urban lifestyle, right, as a representational model has now kind of so percolated, seeped in, right? It's become sort of an autonomous source of change, or you could argue just by keeping people busy watching television, fertility rates are doing. So the whole interplay of rural and urban, right, also needs, in a sense, to be imagined very differently than what we thought of as rural 25, 30 years ago.
It's interesting because in one of Stephen Levitt's books, he mentions this study in India where there was cable in rural areas, and some of the dynamics between men and women started changing over time. And they were just showing one of the unanticipated benefits of it. Just another sort of question, and this is like, I've always wanted to ask this, so forgive me on this one. It's like in Indian movies, why is the bad guy most likely to be called Rakesh? Like,
Rakesh?
I mean, like, why does that happen?
Is it? That's an interesting observation. Actually, that's not the first name that comes to my mind.
I bet you anything that there is absolutely no empirical evidence.
Zero. Like the other one is Roberts. If it's a Christian name, it's Roberts.
No, it was Robert.
Robert.
No, I mean, in fact, I mean, one of the problems with Indian cinema is actually why it's become so boring is that actually there are no villains anymore these days, right? I mean, the whole sort of the whole genre.
Who was the last great villain? I would be Nana Patekar, no?
Yeah, and Nana Patekar was also kind of bigger artist in a way. I mean, he did a lot of. I mean, he was also a villain, but he was also the great cop, also, right? So in that sense, it's
sure,
right? But the villain and I think it's an interesting question whether in Bollywood, right? I mean, one of the problems with Bollywood right now is that there was a kind of mythological form of storytelling which characterized Bollywood, right? Two things characterized the old Bollywood. One was this mythological sort of, exaggerated.
And the other one was Ma.
But the Ma was also mythological sort of,
sure,
right?
I guess,
right?
yes.
And the second was an incredible grammar of emotion, which was the music, right?
Yes.
I mean, the films are all completely forgettable, but the music sort of lives on, right?
An incredible grammar of emotion.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like, you can't buy that kind of smart, man. Like,
No.
No, let's just take a moment and just absorb.
I am Sanskrit, if I'm pronouncing that right. This is great, but that's like word for word.
So my favorite Pratap Bhanu Mehta sort of piece by far is his analysis of Modi as a communicator, which you won't find surprising given our discussions, just the analysis of like the Swachh Bharat and this whole focus on telling the story at the expense. I mean, this is what Pratap was saying, is that when you're this fixated on telling the story, there's almost a guarantee that the content, that the actual journey is like nobody's going to ask about the journey because everybody's sort of eating out of your hand as you are telling the story. And that storytelling as an act of political disruption almost is really kind of the thesis in that piece, right? I find that to be fascinating because I think if you relate what Pratap is saying in that piece and then you sprinkle that over the thing that we call Trump. Should we tell listeners a secret about our little Trump thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you tell.
We did an episode on Trump and how, it's been... we canned it.
Yeah,
so
we deleted it at the end of 30 minutes. 40 minutes?
40
we just deleted it because it felt, inorganic. But to me, that the thing that Modi has done in India in terms of the storyteller and the political performance, the art of the political performance, in a sense, that's now because of the way in which information is exchanged in 2016 and will be in 2020 and 2030 and 2040. And I'm not predicting, I know what it is, but if it even keeps pace at where it's been for the last decade, then this thing is going to become much more definitive. This thesis about the performance over the substance is going to... So what implications does that have beyond India and Pakistan? What happens when the world is... I mean, the world's most powerful man is somebody that literally, I think a lot of us consider to be a clown, who is, I think, even today, even after Iowa, within a hair's whisker of actually potentially being a serious candidate from the Republican side.
I would put the question in slightly different terms, which is I think there are two questions embedded in what you're saying, two different ones. One is the question about communication itself and the way in which communication has actually changed the nature of democracy, right? Which is... has it become more plebiscitary? Has it become much more targeted, right? I mean, there's a whole kind of question of if you think public opinion formation is the core of democracy, right? How does public opinion come to be formed? What does it represent? Can it actually be manufactured? I think those are very deep questions that democracies have kind of sort of struggled with. And I think to Modi's credit and his team's credit, they actually recognize possibilities of doing it in ways we did not think were possible in Indian politics, right? Nobody thought you could run a presidential style campaign in India, right? Yeah. Technology allows you to do that, right? And frankly, sheer energy. I mean, I think there's one data point which says, I think he addressed something like 700 rallies during the election and Rahul Gandhi addressed like 110. I mean, that's like a 1-to-7 ratio, right?
Yeah. So that's lights out right there.
But I think the second...
Rahul missed out on his iodine drops as a child. Right. I mean, he needs to up the game.
No, but if he missed out on his iodine drops, then there's no game to up.
As an Oxford man, I should not comment on a Cambridge graduate. But I think the second thing, which I think is to my mind the more serious issue, because I actually do think I still have confidence that in democracy some of these things are self-correcting, which is it can provide an opening, it can catapult you to power, but I by and large think actually people have a much more level head than we actually give them credit for. So here's Narendra Modi, right, the great communicator, and within like weeks of winning in national election, he starts losing election after election again, right? Lost Delhi, right there, just lost Bihar. And one of the lessons of Bihar was that actually the same thing doesn't work in every campaign. So I think these are cycles democracies will go through. I think the harder and the deeper question, which somebody like Trump raises, and some would argue Modi also raised that in a parallel way. I mean, it's a very different political structure and so forth, is there a vein of unarticulated, untapped rage and fear that mainstream political parties have not only not been able to recognize, but they are seen to be shutting out a bunch of questions,
and skirting,
right?
Yeah.
And one, I mean, it's an oversimplistic explanation, but one sort of, simplistic explanation would be in a sense that, look, last 20 years was a project of globalization, which involved a compact between elites around the world. And it was a hugely successful project at one level, right? It's created enduring international institutions. Certainly for intra-country inequalities, India has benefited greatly from integrating into the world economy, right? But the fact is there were a large number of losers in that project, right? And it got to a point where many of those losers began to feel that there is no narrative for them. Right, and this very bizarre phenomenon you have in the US, right, which you also have in India, right? There's the majorities-minority complex, but a lot of white working class people, right, beginning to feel, hey, there's no narrative for us. We are not part of this global elite. On the other hand, we can't even claim victim status, right? So there's this kind of dual rage, right, which is expressing itself in rage on the race question on the one hand, right? And I think the challenging question is, in a sense, why is it that mainstream political parties, right, sort of become a little tone deaf to these things that have been bubbling up, and I think that's in a sense the question, because look, for voters, I mean, elections are really about a choice between two alternatives, and the question is who looks more credible to you. And I think the deeper question is why have we come to a situation where many voters are beginning to feel, which is, I don't care about Trump, but this guy looks patently insincere, right?
Yeah.
Now, if I may ask, and I know we wanted to discuss like not too much about the India-Pakistan thing, but if there's the opportunity, if I could. So, I mean, I found one thing that's interesting is like, I think in some ways we've moved beyond Pakistan, India having its historical bone of contention, which is Kashmir, and now it's much more about bigger ambitions. What do we do in the region? Who controls? Who calls the shots? But I've always wondered about Kashmir, and its interesting thing is like, I've always personally never felt as strongly for it in a way that I do see that there's a lot of travesties, a lot of excesses, and that, Kashmir can't go on as it is. But I mean, what's the option set for India? I mean, India could conceivably never lose a piece of its territory. It would be a domino effect. So what's the future? Why is it that in some ways India is not able to get the population in a way that it could work out well? And I was just reminded of this. Like, it almost seemed comedic recently when Anupam Kher said, one of the reasons why I've not been invited to Pakistan is because I'm a Kashmiri Pandit. And we're like, no, you're a bad actor, man. That's the reason we didn't give you the visa.
I mean, I would give him that. I actually do think he's a good actor. The point is he seems to be taking his acting into the public sphere.
Yes.
Which is a slightly different problem. That's right. I think two different set of answers, right? So one, a general point about the Indian experiment, let's call it, right? The Indian political project. One of the remarkable successes of the Indian political project, and actually I think you have to grant India that, no matter where you come from, is that wherever it has tried democratic incorporation, it has kind of succeeded, right? So potentially this could be 20 different countries. We had, the Tamil movement, secessionists and so on. It created innovative structures for incorporation and participation, right? The two big failures are the northeast of India and Kashmir, right? And partly Punjab for a brief while. And the common thread to both, and I'll be the first to say this, which is wherever the Indian state has tried a heavy repressive hand, right, it sort of backfires, right? And in Kashmir in particular, there is no denying that there is a history of a repressive Indian. And now we can argue what the reasons for it, but that fact remains, right, which is it's the only state where until recently you were not confident that the elections were free and fair. By and large, we've done a remarkable job of elections. And now we're doing a very good job in Kashmir. But, the fact is that, till the 1980s, 1990s, everybody thought elections were rigged, and for good reason, right? It is also a state like the Northeast that is in the vicious cycle of whenever you have sort of great military presence in a state, right? The fact is you've had, 300,000, 400,000 troops in Kashmir. You have the Armed Forces Special Powers Act in place. And that does have a psychological effect on the people. I mean, I just shudder to think what would it be like for me if I were to live under, right, those kinds of conditions, right? Now, the one step that India has taken forward and where it has, I think, achieved some success, I say, is that over the last 10, 15 years, it has now tried the mode of domestic democratic incorporation. It's not fully successful yet. I mean, I think the test will be the day we can sort of, let go of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Right, so that's on the kind of domestic side, which is I will be the first to say that it is part of an unfinished project of democratization, and that should be the core value at stake, right?
Not Indianness.
Sorry,
not Indian. This goes back to your point
not
about
Indianness,
identity.
because I'm actually convinced that actually democratization produces a deeper form of Indians like to say unity in diversity. I like to say diverse in unities, which is once you allow for democracy, it'll allow people to create very different kinds of connections, right?
Yeah.
So, and in fact, I think India stays as a nation because it's democratic. If it were to become autocratic, it would actually split up, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a deep connection between the Indian project and the democratic project. If India is not a democracy...
And would it be clumsy, like in your view, to sort of then say that maybe the Ayub Khan years fast-forwarded sort of, the fissipariousness of this project, the one that we are a product of.
Right. I mean, look, I can't claim to be an expert in Pakistan, but just in comparative politics terms, right? The two sort of challenges for Pakistan, right, in that project is one was the kind of the construction of an idea of national identity, and at least in India there is a perception, and I think in a lot of the literature, I mean, Farzana Sheikh, for example, the sense that the identity narrative somehow was constituted out of a kind of negative, right? We are not India, right? And there were various attempts to kind of, convert a South Asian country into kind of more a West Asian mold, which weren't going to work. I mean, we knew they were fraught projects to begin with, right? But the fact is leaders tried them, right? So one of the challenges for Pakistan is in a sense, and I think, it's not an easy challenge because you did not have, in a sense, a political party. Because one of the good things about the Congress is that the years of the nationalist movement had given it an institutional structure that allowed those negotiations to take place in whatever inchoate form they did.
And our institution was one guy.
Right? One guy, the legitimacy questions. And the second, in the process of state formation, the balance of civil-military relations, right, has kind of sort of shifted, right, in various ways. And to lay on top of that, I think the mistake which I think many Pakistani leaders have made, and we discussed this afternoon, which is, by allowing itself to, in a sense, be a frontline state in other people's conflicts. I think Pakistan has paid a very heavy price for that, right? And by the way, it's true of many states in the Cold War, that those states that became the frontier of those conflicts, right, paid an incredible price for those conflicts. In a sense, it's kind of not sort of, recovered sort of from that. But on the Kashmir question, just kind of returning to it, which is, look, I think in heart of hearts, most people on both sides of the border, I think, recognize that realistically, by force, changing borders is not going to be an option, right? I mean, we are nuclear weapon states. I mean, it's worth reminding ourselves of that little brute fact, right?
No, but what if we take the force part out of the equation?
Right. Now, the really important part, and which is the way to sell it politically, right, is my own conviction is that the Kashmir issue can be settled only in the context of a larger reimagination of relationships across South Asia, right? So as we began with, right, there are all these traps we've kind of boxed ourselves into, right? And I think the premise of, let's say, the Mosharraf framework, right, was a small step in that direction, which is, if we had open borders, would the whole issue of Kashmir actually matter that much, right? If our national identities were not constituted by this axis of animosity, would Kashmir matter that much? Right now, Kashmir matters and the stakes are high because it's at the crossroads of two national identity projects. If the character of those national identities changes a bit, right, then the stakes are lowered. Then you can actually focus on these other questions. And there's a joke in philosophy that there's never a solution to a philosophical problem. The only solution is you change the question, right? And I think in Kashmir, I think right now, what we need to do, in a sense, throw cold water. Say, look, the core has to be the protection of the individual liberties and democratic rights of ordinary citizens, just like it has to be the case across all of South Asia. And there are ways of liberating ourselves from this siege mentality by beginning to make borders irrelevant. Once those borders become less relevant, the stakes actually become, much more easier to handle. So I think that's the kind of the route into thinking of a new kind of sort of, imagination, right? And look, it's not
What's
just...
the timeline in your mind for something like that?
Look, that...
I mean, I'm not asking for a specific year, but I mean,
clearly
we're not thinking about like...
So here's my timeline, right? Which is both India and Pakistan, right? The next 15 years are crucial because of our demography, right? This is the window we have where the dependency ratio is favorable to us, where you have this great youth bulge. And if we blow these next 15 years, then it's very likely that South Asia shall forever remain poor and conflict-ridden, right?
What's your tip over year? Ours is 2043. 2043 is when we stop benefiting from the demographic.
So ours has now come down to about 2030, right? I mean,
Okay.
it's actually, and it might actually even come down faster because I think for all of these changes in fertility, we have actually sort of, in a sense, kind of or rather underestimated the rate of that change.
So, by the way, just for the listeners, we're talking about the demographic dividend sort of year in which the young population stops growing faster than the old population. So for Pakistan, I think Durre who works at PIDE has calculated 2043, and Pratap, you're saying for India it's 2032?
20, right? So the real issue, right, is if we miss this opportunity, we're going to pay a huge cost. I mean, then forget about, the joke about India used to be, it's a joke used in several contexts, is India is a country of the future and shall always remain so, right? Right? So you shall...
That's actually
a very good one.
You have to think about it, though.
Yeah.
Like you can't just,
So you shall always remain in the future, right? So therefore, and I know... Frankly, it's not a very popular view in India that, many in India are beginning to feel, look, why do we even care about the region, right? Let's just kind of bypass the region, outgrow it, connect with the world. We have our American diaspora. We are part of Silicon Valley. Why the hell do we need to worry about Sialkot and so forth, right? But the fact of the matter is that those unresolved issues, right, which burst out in unusual ways, sometimes calmly, sometimes across the LOC, they are a great drag on our societies and our economies, right? And I don't mean just in prosaic terms, defense spending, all of that. We'll probably still have defense spending. There's a big dragon lurking next door, all of those things. But I think the inchoate psychological way in which the burden of the past still distorts our democratic politics, right? The character of our nationalism, the way politicians are able to use our nationalisms to, in a sense, create fissures within society, right? It's a huge distraction. I mean, the amount of intellectual energy, peacekeeping, all of that we have to devote to just kind of, keep a lid on that conflict. If we were liberated of that burden, I think the nature of our politics would transform. So in that sense, I do think there is a sense of urgency about this, that I don't see this simply as, something that you have to achieve at the end of a long process. It's actually a necessary instrument
to get to
saying, do we want South Asia to be a zone of freedom or prosperity? Or do we want it to be a zone of identity traps and conflict?
I mean, it's interesting.
That's heavy.
Ghairat or identity is... I mean, I often wonder is like how on top of our scale of wances it is. I sometimes find that it's quite high, actually. Yeah. It's not going to be an easy thing to transverse. Yeah. We speak of certain things, but we get sidetracked fairly easily. Just another quick question. Do we have time?
I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I mean, we're going over a bit, but, I'm sort of okay with it.
No, I think we're having too much fun with these things, Fasi. Yes. Like last week, Pratap, we did this. I told you about this episode that we did. It was an hour and 36 minutes. Everybody keeps telling us 20 minutes, 20 minutes. Right. We started with an hour. We did another hour. Then we did 40 minutes, I guess. Yeah. Then we did like an hour and 36 minutes. And we felt, I mean, I really feel the love, and I'm really sort of, I feel blessed that people are listening, or at least people pretend to be listening.
Yeah.
So let's keep going. I have to tell you, we could go for another couple of hours, and I wouldn't have a problem with that. Yeah. So go on.
So just a quick question. I mean, the other thing I've been noticing, obviously, with the meat bans and, with your stars speaking up and whatever, what is the future of the Muslim in India? Because, I mean, as an external...
Exec. Hold on. You just raised Kashmir, now you're raising,
That's okay.
You've gone... No, it's fine. Of course, I know it's okay.
I know what he's trying to say.
Wait a second. First of all, I thought that was... Bro.
I don't know. What's gotten into me?
What is wrong with you?
You know what all our friends are going to say?
Yeah.
You have to stop hanging out with me.
Yes, I know. I swear I'm going to get DMs. Give me Mosharraf has done this on
No, but usually this is the kind of... I would expect Fasi to say, hey, why can't we just get along? We're just the same. Because he's like this happy-go-lucky peacenik.
So I am, but
Wait, so you're seriously going to ask that question?
I can't believe it, but I really want to ask this.
Hell of a way to welcome Pratap Bhanu Mehta to Pakistan.
Yes.
Go on.
So, I mean, what's the point of coming to Pakistan and not get a tough time, right?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it's such an honor to have you. I would feel bad at the end of the day if every little question I've had, I just don't ask it. But I'm just wondering, what is the future of... Oh my God. What is the future of the Muslim in India?
Okay, so consistent with what I just said about changing the question as a way of answering it,
yes.
I think I'll reframe the question slightly, right? Which is...
The problem is he's smarter than us.
So he doesn't squirm out of this one. He's made the premise already.
So it is kind of question the premise, which is, I don't think the question of the future of Muslims in India is a sort of separate question, as if one could say that somehow that question can be detached from the future of Indian democracy. Let me put it this way, right? Which is, the future of India is going to be safe, and the future of Indian democracy is going to be safe only if Muslims in India are safe and flourish. Right, because there's, I mean, you can think about it crudely, right? I mean, this is 120 million people, right? I mean, how can you not have a social structure? By and large, Indian democracy, for all its faults, right? I mean, and even though the Hindu-Muslim politics is a divisive issue in politics, the fact of the matter is that both at a vernacular level, and I actually think at the popular level, I think actually the trends are in the right direction, contrary to what our friends in Times Now might actually sort of project, right? In fact, since 2002, I mean, as you know, there was a steep decline in the number of kind of communal riots. One of the interesting things that's happened is the whole idea of kind of revenge riots, 2002, that revenge thing has gotten a bit out of our system in a sense. And, the dissociation of Indian Muslims from Pakistan, which used to be pretty automatic in the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that dissociation is now deep. I mean,
so what caused that dissociation?
So the cause of that dissociation was an understanding. And this is the Indian construction of the terrorism problem, right?
Yeah.
That terrorism, whatever one thinks of it, is part of a kind of geostrategic struggle between India and Pakistan. It has actually nothing to do with
the
Indian
state
Muslims.
of the Indian Muslims.
Either the state of the Indian Muslims and the fact that Indian Muslims have time and again not just chosen to participate. Al-Qaeda had no success recruiting in India. You would have thought, if this was a persecuted community, we always say this kind of, right? This would be propitious hunting ground. Actually, quite the contrary. Also the fact that no matter what happens, right, there are always secular political forces available that can actually channel some of that political energy, right? Mr. Modi and Amit Shah try something in Bihar. There is a Lalu standing there. Now, there are lots of other problems with Lalu. I mean,
But on this, he's...
sort of, right?
Yeah.
So I think the
I don't know how to phrase this, but I love Lalu.
Absolutely. No. He is... I absolutely love him as well. He's one of the truly remarkable politicians.
Like a good Irishman, I also love my Lalu.
So this is one of the tragedies, right? Which is he is another supremely gifted politician. And not just supremely gifted, I mean, not just the most charming, but in his own ways will tell you the unpalatable truths, right? And I think the tragedy is that, again, that enormous political talent frittered away when it came to running the state and administration, right? That disjunction between what it takes to be a good politician and what it takes to run a good state, right? He's actually a perfect example of that disjunction. And I hope kind of this time around he's learned a few lessons. But the point is that in a sense, there are lots of forces and not just that. I mean, look, even the BJP, right? no matter what one thinks of its intentions and ideological moodings. The one thing Mr. Modi does know is that if there is a major outbreak of Hindu-Muslim violence, right? Now we can define the threshold of major, eye of the, this is a kind of Sorites paradox
40
right?
is okay.
40 is okay, 100 is okay. But if there is it will do two things which will make Mr. Modi's life very uncomfortable. First of all, it will completely put a damper on India's global ambitions. Because let's face it, India's global ambitions depend upon the power of the Indian example. This is the other enlightenment power, and the only power India has, frankly, the power of its example, right? If it can say, this is a place that is the crossroads of lots of civilizations, cultures, can negotiate diversity, it'll have a great future in the world. The second thing it'll do, as happened in Bihar, is that the more communal he goes, the more the opposition has an incentive to unite and an axis around which to unite. His electoral success depended upon dividing the opposition. And you could divide the opposition when it was a kind of normal election. But when the states become polarizing, right, the chances that the opposition unite will go up. So I don't claim to read anybody's heart or head, but I do think that the structural forces of Indian democracy
are the protective canopy
canopy within which I think Muslims will find a political space and political voice.
Okay.
I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, I probably would like to agitate a little bit further on this question, right? Like, because we hear a lot of this, the Al-Qaeda sort of thing, right? That Al-Qaeda tried to recruit in India and it didn't have that much success. But we do know that Daesh sort of has had. And so I think there's a lot there, but I do also think that that's probably a second entire conversation. Right. And there's probably people, in addition to you, like that follow this much more closely from a security standpoint that could really weigh in. I wanted to sort of just, I mean, we've talked to you about India, and that was really the point, because we want listeners to be able to sort of hear what you have to say about India. This thing about the similarities between India and Pakistan. One way to look at it is, of course, that we are very similar. But I think I will say the thing that, often is unpopular to say is that, in fact, we're not all that similar. I mean, I hear this from a lot of people 70 years on, even institutionally. Yes, British common law in both countries. And yes, the IAS officers have a very similar attitude to what the DMG and now the BAS officers have, but that's the same thing as senior British civil servants in America. So like that doesn't say much. They're not that similar institutionally, agree. Culturally. There's huge differences. I think that those differences are actually really useful because it helps us relate to each other as on an international footing.
I agree.
Whereas I think that the burden of the previous generation, the Manmohan Singh burden, was that, or Atal Bihari Vajpayee, is that they come over to the border and they kind of sort of claim parts of this. And, General Musharraf goes to Delhi and says, I remember being from this. And there's a lot of young Pakistanis and Indians who are thinking, what the hell is he talking about?
Exactly.
Like, we're not the same. Please don't pretend we're the same. Let us be different. Because in that difference is actually probably the path to sort of an enlightened understanding of each other.
Right.
I actually do agree with that. I mean, I find my questions are based on, we're similar countries and there's things that we can see how something similar.
Well, it's hot in both places.
Yeah.
And they're brown people.
Brown people.
Can I just amplify on this point?
Yes.
Because I think you've touched on something very important. And it kind of explains the sort of the kind of this oscillation we have from we go from sentimentality to animosity in like the space of 2 minutes. And again, it's a fissure that runs through each one of us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we actually have seen that in conversations, right? We just kind of...
Yeah.
And I think this demands a deeper diagnosis. And one way of thinking about it is actually going back to the partition question. Intezar Hussain just passed away, and if you spent a lot of time reading partition literature, right, from Rahi Masoom Raza to Manto, one of the things that strikes you about that literature in retrospect, which we haven't got our head around, is so there's one narrative that kind of goes, we're kind of the same. There was a civilizational unity, or something had emerged kind of post Akbar. We created an accommodation, and then these damned politicians came along, and Congress on the one hand and Muslim League on the other, and they just ruined everything, right? That is a kind of, pretty dominant narrative, which is, and in response to the narrative...
And it's well-intentioned.
It's well-intentioned, and in response to that narrative, we always retreat back to the space of culture. And the space of culture is a very attractive space. A, because it's always uplifting. I mean, look, music would dissolve half the evil in the world. I completely believe that.
And
right?
also, hashtag Priyanka Chopra.
Right.
I heart hashtag Priyanka Chopra.
I'm with you.
It's the good, right? But what we haven't come to terms is that not just in the events leading up to the partition, but even post-partition, the question you asked about sort of the fate of Muslims in India, right, was a very specific institutional and political problem, right? And the specific institutional and political problem was, in the context of universal suffrage, how do minority rights get protected? What is the form of and that was the negotiation from 1905 to 1947, right?
Yep.
You give veto, you give, proportional, you give... The fact of the matter is there was never any stable solution to that question and that problem. And frankly, we are still struggling with that problem in some ways.
But the
right?
greatest manifestation of the truth of that is Bangladesh's existence as a separate state,
Exactly.
despite being next door to West Bengal.
Right, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things, and we also then build these walls and barriers, right? And frankly, if you just pull them down, we'll all get a sense of vertigo, right? So we have to kind of psychologically handle them nicely. But the conversation that has to happen now, I agree with you entirely, has to be framed in terms of institutionals, in terms of our development needs, in terms of a shared vision around new kinds of political values.
Yep.
Now, the cultural stuff can be deployed as a resource, right? And certainly it's a big asset. I mean, look, let's not deny its power. But any route through that problem to kind of saying it's the same culture is actually just denying 80 years of what that same culture in a sense did to us.
Yeah.
So I think you made actually a very powerful point, and which is why I think the question to stand back is, if you want to convert South Asia into a zone of freedom, individual liberty, prosperity, right? What are some of the fetters you have to remove? And if you remove those fetters, right, a lot of this interaction and so forth will happen anywhere and spontaneously.
At a subnational level, this converges exactly with the point that you opened with, right? That the idea of Indianness is really rooted for Pratap in these freedoms. I like to do it in a little more sort of hackneyed way, which is that a lot of Pakistanis, because the concept of Pakistan has been reasonably fragile, are very, very uncomfortable with embracing the sub-nations that comprise Pakistan. And a lot of those sub-nations don't like being called sub-nations. A Pakhtun says, hello, I've been speaking Pashto for 5,000 years. I learned how to sort of chant in Arabic about 1,400 years ago or 1,200 years ago. And I learned that there was a thing called Pakistan as a constructed word about 70 years ago. So don't tell me that I'm a sub-nation. And that's perfectly legitimate. And what I think for a lot of modern forward-looking Pakistanis who are nationalists in the way that I am, I think that the comfort that we need to have and the importance of federalism for Pakistan in particular. I think India's moved on. There's an evolved federal sort of, conversation in India. But for Pakistan, we are a very basic, fundamentally federal state. We must be, and it must be through the acknowledgement and embrace of these multiple nations that comprise the Pakistani nation. And so if we can accept that, then it makes it easier for us to talk to India, not in this emotional sort of straitjacket where we kind of forced to contend with all these demons of, this great new book by Nisid Hajari, I mean, but that is some traumatic, brutal, barbaric stuff, right? I mean, and then the blood telegram and the whole sort of, so I think we won't be able to have normal state-to-state interactions as long as we continue to allow these countries to be seen in a lens of, but we're the same people. I can't say to a Bangladeshi, look, man, we're brothers and we were one together, because he's thinking, but he's thinking, that's the whole problem, dude. We weren't one from the start. We wanted to get away. You treated us in a way that helped us get away. Please get away from me and speak to me in English, because you don't speak my language and I don't speak yours. So I do think we need to sort of...
I just add one more thing to that. I mean, I think your point about federalism and regionalism is actually absolutely spot on, right? And that's also a mode of democratic incorporation, right? What's that about? That's about a certain mode of inclusive governance, that you can have a voice, you can have a space, right? But I think there is one fundamental value that any functioning society in the modern world will have to reconcile itself to, if it's not to generate undue conflict. And that is the value of individual dissent. Including to the point of blasphemy, frankly. Which is, it is the nature of this world that there will be lots of people who have their own individual conceptions of meaning and so forth. And any attempt to say that the state or even a conception of national identity can, in a sense, in the name of scripting an identity, crack down on those individual freedoms. To my mind, that is a recipe for, in a sense, conflict, right? So, I mean, look, let's face it. I mean, probably one of the most vulnerable groups in Pakistan has always been the Ahmadiyas, right?
Yeah.
And partly because there is a kind of theological concern. I mean, Iqbal, who I absolutely adore, I mean, he's one of the greatest intellectuals ever. I mean, the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam is the, in a sense, capstone of modern Indian intellectual history, its philosophical intricacy and so forth, right? But even he, on that particular question, right, because somehow it became this kind of totem of defining a benchmarked identity.
Well,
right?
it was a touchstone.
Right?
You had to sort of,
right?
yeah.
The minute you have touchstones, always create insecurity. There's a joke in the 18th century that it didn't occur to anybody to doubt God's existence until philosophers began to give arguments to prove his existence. And I actually think of nations that way. That, Pakhtuns, Ahmadiyas, they'll all find hundreds of different reasons for engaging. The minute somebody sits down and says, this is what it means to be Pakistani, guaranteed there'll be a counter-reaction.
Yeah. I think that's such a brilliant way to present that. I agree absolutely.
Yeah,
because I see this at very low levels where you speak to people, and now I'm speaking just from the Pakhtun perspective, and it's exactly that. Is the moment somebody tells you that this is what you have to be minimum for you to be accepted.
Nishta.
I agree.
Yeah.
I just had also another thing. I find this really interesting in the politics of India, Pakistan is you have
just to FYI, right? There's about 35, 40 people like standing around in a room somewhere right now, about 20 minutes away, that are like, where is Pratap?
Right.
Mosharraf took him.
If I just tell them I was with Fasi, they'll explain.
Shall we wind up then?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
but finish your thought, because you were with an important sort of idea.
Goes back to being in a boys' college. Like when you use even phrases like that, you just think, "Ha show the funny, no matter how old you get."
By the way, so Pratap hasn't experienced this sort of the lowbrow sort of quality of discourse between the two of us since he was in college.
You have no idea how low is.
Anyhow, so I was just very quickly. I was just saying, is like there's this articulation in the metros, even in the rural areas where people.
By the way, you keep saying metros, and a lot of your viewers are going to be sort of thinking Jungla bus and everything. Please clarify what you mean by metros.
Sorry, just metropolitan areas, urban centers, semi-urban centers.
He means cities.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, and the point is like there's this articulation. If only our country was honest. If only we had rule of law, and it's fairly everywhere. And you then have these parties like AAP, you have PTI in Pakistan, and one would imagine that they would sweep, right? And it just goes to show you that how these individual regional ethnic identities remain so strong that even though this is an articulation, but what really concerns them is like these other levers that are important. And so I'm just wondering, like, where do you see that going? Where does a party like AAP go?
No, so that's an interesting question, right? So, and one interesting comparison to make in this context is I often talk to Indian students about the comparison between the Gilded Age in the US and its transition to a progressive era. Because we are kind of in that situation, right? Crony capitalism all over, big infrastructure, right? All of the stuff, right? City machine politics, right? Throw in a bunch of ethnic things in the mix.
And the Ambanis are the Rockefellers.
Right, exactly. Yeah. The big, right? In some senses, even worse, actually, right?
Well, definitely richer.
Right.
Yeah.
And one measure of this is at least the American kind of crony capitalists controlled one sector at a time, right?
These guys are all over the
place. Four critical infrastructure sectors all at once, right? Yeah. But I think what the AAP moment demonstrated, and I think Imran, was that there is that possibility that, right, people are willing to sort of not just vote on it, but that is an issue of big concern, where if somebody tells them a story, going back to what I said, right, which is there is a structure of governance that was upside down. It was supposed to answer to you, it answers to some big guy. It was supposed to give you participation, it actually excludes you, right? It was supposed to keep things open and transparent. In fact, actually a lot of murky stuff is happening behind closed doors, right? So there is that possibility. I think to capitalize on that possibility, you have to have this very incoherent thing called political judgment. Now, judgment is a very different thing than having an ideology or than having an idea or even being a great guy, right? Judgment requires, and particularly in elections in India and Pakistan, where you're actually talking about taking different diverse constituencies together, how do you actually project your credibility, right? And I think one of the things you're finding in our politicians, even the best ones, right, even somebody who was as good as Narendra Modi, right, in winning a national election, their sense of confidence about how they read their messages on people is actually much less confident and secure than we think. In fact, I think most politicians, if you ask them,
incredibly insecure.
Say, we have no idea what the hell public opinion wants, right? I mean, and it's certainly not what the television studio says it wants, but what is it outside of that we don't know, right?
Yeah.
And the challenge is, can you have a political movement that can capitalize on that movement and AAP, I think it's still a work in progress. Look, AAP is going to do very well in Punjab, and if it does well in Punjab, it's on a comeback trail. Don't go by the headlines in Delhi. I mean, there's a lot of sort of, Kejriwal has also learnt a few tricks from Modi. He's a tenacious kind of character, but their core constituency is still solidly behind them, right?
And what precludes parties like AAP from having a sense of humor? Just 1 inch of sense.
So the intrinsic feature of power is that you begin to take yourselves too seriously, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look, humor always comes from the powerless and the marginalized,
yes.
right? The most astonishing humor always comes from the power and the marginalized, right? Because you have to have that. I mean, anybody in power at some point will take themselves too seriously,
yes,
right? So in a sense, AAP is kind of, has kind of those traits. But I think the possibility of those new kinds of arrangements, and look, party building is, no political party in the world. In fact, AAP's opening was the biggest that any new political party ever has. Political party building is a 20-year affair. And
were they World Bank funded, or what was the fund?
they were crowdsourced funded, right? They capitalized on the bank of the world, which is meaning the entire world.
Indian diaspora.
The entire world. I mean, and actually, most of the contributions were Indian. In
domestic,
fact, a lot of Indian capital actually sustained them in the early days. But you need simultaneously see what made the Congress Party work in its early days, and let's not underestimate the fact was that it was a team, right? No matter what Jawaharlal Nehru did, you could point to 10, 15, 20 people who had lots of misjudgments and flaws, but fundamentally people said about them that their intention is good, right? An ability to put aside differences. Gandhi ji said something which this is my favorite Gandhi quote. He always said that our besetting sin is not our differences, it's our littleness, right? That kind of ability, right, to be able to sort of negotiate difference and, right, that requires a very different kind of political judgment. So with all of these political moments, I think it's happening with Imran Khan, to a certain extent happened with Kejriwal. It became my way or the highway, right? Which is actually the antithesis of what politics requires, right? What politics requires is, I can come talk to you, look you in the eye and say, I understand your pain. Here's how we are going to sort of, in a sense, deal with it. Swiftness with which the political class gets detached from that conversation, I think it's a big challenge. And look, these are complex societies, lots of, so I wouldn't underestimate the challenge of doing that. Imran Khan, I don't know Pakistan politics that well, but I'm kind of surprised that he's not out there in the space vacated by the MQM. The
MQM,
Karachi, right?
Partly because the MQM hasn't vacated that space.
Oh, okay. So I stand corrected. Thinking that, perhaps, not, but it certainly doesn't have the kind of authority that it sort of did, or perhaps it does.
I think it's a fascinating question for another conversation, because
that's a conversation we should have when both of you visit India.
Inshallah, absolutely. I look forward to that.
I think we'll wrap it up, Pratap. Thank you so much. This was really
it was an education. It was fantastic. Thank you so much for making this time.
And just to summarize, right, on your last bit, there's this thing I read by Shobha Dey, which actually. I'm sorry,
we've gone from Pratap
Bhanu Mehta
already to Shobha Dey.
Yes.
We started with
Bulle. That really raised me.
No, but it's just another.
We started with Bulle Shah and we're ending with Shobha Dey.
So just talking about this region, she was saying that there are people who can do, those who can't do, and then there's the. We're gonna summarize. We're gonna excise this, but her point being is
Yes.
being really limited, being really petty, and having that again. Going back to the beginning thing is the toleration thing, which is just sort of bringing it up, and it's great to have you here, and I hope that we can have more opportunities like this.
I think Pakistan and India need to do a lot more of this,
I agree.
particularly with PBM. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you on your television channel next time, right?
I don't have one.
No. I mean that was the trajectory, right?
Oh,
From
yeah.
Graduating
Oh, yeah.
from this to
Of
that.
course,
right? I know.
the video podcast, inshallah.
Yeah,
That's next.
No, that's
Absolutely.
right. All right.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Pratap.
Thank you.